welcome to Target. I'm Paula Durant from the United Church of Christ, your host. My guest this evening is David Weill, who is director of the East Brunswick Public Library. He is our guest tonight, and inspired by the placement of the Holocaust collection in the East Brunswick Library. But as I began to explore that, we realized there were many other concerns that we might share, like how a book is placed on our shelves or taken from our shelves, and how the community might be more, the library might be more accountable to the needs and interests of the community. So welcome, David.
Thank you, Paul.
First, let's start with the Holocaust collection. That occurred as a result of concerned people in our community who met with you over a couple of years' time. Is that correct?
That's right. It actually started almost 3 years ago when a group of people decided that they wanted to do more than had been done up to that point to inform people about the Holocaust, its history, and its consequences.
Based on the premise that to forget is to possibly repeat, and
Right.
to remember is to...
Every year during Holocaust Remembrance Week, essentially the same ideas are expressed about the importance of studying the Holocaust, both by people who were personally involved in it and by the Jewish faith, and also by the governmental commissions that have been established more or less permanently to commemorate this event. The first interest on the part of the people who got together was establishing a fund to build a collection in their own religious institution. After further thought, they decided that wasn't as appropriate as making the collection available to the whole community. Mm-hmm. At that point, they came to the library.
And the library was responsive to this.
This brought up an issue of a request by an interest group. No matter what their majority or minority status is in the community, there was a particular interest group who wanted to do a particular thing of interest to them for the benefit of the community. So our first job was to consider this within the context of our existing policies and within the context of our obligations and our responsibilities to be both responsive to interest groups who want to place materials in the library, but also be responsive to the potential users of the collection. Clearly, right away, the least important thing was which group and why, or why was the collection being presented or being offered to the library. It was not important to us in terms of our thinking and planning. What was important was that we follow our own policies, which would require us to determine what is the potential use of such a collection. As with any recommendations or suggestions that we get, we do not consider the source. That is not really what's important. What is important is what is the use going to be? Because the philosophy upon which we build our collection is that it be used and that it be useful. And we make distinctions between those two questions. But we are not a research library trying to build a collection of record without regard to who is actually going to use that collection. So when we first considered this possible gift, we had to come to a determination that the collection would actually be used to the extent to which it was being suggested. That is to say, the size of it would be merited by the use it would get. And we have been somewhat cautious as we've gone along in the development not to buy more than the audience was interested in using. And we think that when we started out this past month with the dedication of the collection, that we had a very good base collection that would satisfy mass assignments in the schools as well as individual study on the part of individuals in the community. And that if a great deal of interest did grow as a result of this, an inordinate amount of interest, we still have the potential for increasing the scope and the depth of the collection.
Now, in what you have just said, there's so many questions and directions we could take. As someone who is frustrated sometimes by what I don't find on the shelves here because of certain needs I have in my field of endeavor, I sometimes think the book should be there because it's a wonderful book and it doesn't matter that nobody's going to read it. A good library should have a good basic collection of, for example, in my field, psychology or theology or grief work books that seem useful in a particular context for people. But I understand the other side of that is that you have a limited amount of shelf space, a limited budget, and it is not a reference library, it's a circulation library. And so all of that means that subjective decisions are made on a day-to-day basis by you and your staff about what will or will not be put there and what will or will not stay.
Right.
And would you like to comment about that?
Surely.
I find it, you and I have had this discussion before.
Yes, it's a discussion that's very interesting. It will never reach a conclusion because I don't believe there is any definitive conclusion to be reached. It's also a discussion that librarians around the country are having all the time. Currently, the popular trend in this discussion is to call it the argument between quality and quantity. Mm-hmm. The argument between give them what they want and give them what they ought to have. In the 19th century, when public or popular libraries started, they were seen as upholders of the highest traditions of American culture and religious belief and traditions, etc. They were seen as uplifting moral influences on the masses rather than as popular places where people could go to get what they wanted. And in Boston, for example, in the 1860s, if you went into the Boston Public Library, you probably could not borrow, or read, I should say, a novel, certainly not a popular novel, unless it were deemed to have uplifting social value or spiritual value. And I think that idea has eroded along with the concepts and the philosophies of our whole culture over this first two-thirds or first 80 years of the century. I think that while I may say eroded, I guess what I really mean is it has changed. And today we find our popular culture is ascendant, and the aspect of moral or uplifting concepts as expressed through books or through television or even through attendance at church, etc., is fighting for a share that once was the whole share or the dominant share. The library is caught in the middle of this cultural shift, and we have to ask the questions, especially a library like this, which is so generously supported by tax funds. Who gives us the mandate to represent only which is morally or culturally uplifting? Do the taxpayers give us that mandate? Is there some other source from which that comes? Or is that a measure of institutional arrogance from which we should shrink? I guess the answer to that might depend on one's doctrinal outlook. I would hope not. I would hope that it's a general question everybody could agree on. On the other hand, as the argument goes, if you have to choose between having 20 copies of a book that 1,000 people want to read and having one copy of a book that one person wants to read, how do you make such a decision? How do you balance that? That's an extreme illustration. Some libraries have purportedly opted on the side of quantity or popularity, give them what they want, that people have the right and the ability to choose their own materials, and the librarian's job is to try to estimate and measure what people actually want and will read, and to concentrate on selecting those items and retaining those items, and not giving shelf space to things that are going to sit. It's the old Bishop Berkeley argument. What is the sound of a tree falling in a vacuum. Now, what is the value of a book that sits on a shelf unread for 5 years? Does a library keep it because someday somebody might read it?
On the other hand, I have a sense of libraries and reading that because of television and the changing expectations people have about being entertained by either a movie or a book or a play, that we've all lowered our standards to such an extent we don't know what's there that's higher than the norm, or the book you have 20 copies of instead of the one it takes me 10 minutes to find. Frequently I find that when I'm looking for relaxing reading, everything I've read that's been beautiful and wonderful, I happen to love May Sarton's novels and some things like that, but I've read them all. Now where do I go? How do I find the next wonderful author that I don't know exists? Because I look at your shelves and I see 30 copies of Jacqueline Suzanne, which I know I don't want to read, but I don't see 30 copies of May Sarton, and I don't find the author who's of her quality, in my view, to captivate and tell a good story and lead me somewhere for an hour or two that's wonderful. How do I find this? How do you, as my librarian, help me?
There are two different problems there. One is for the librarian to know what follows from May Sarton, any more than the reader knows. And another thing that has been lost over the last 50 years is the idea that librarians really know books, particularly fiction. There was a column, I think it was about a year ago, that Louise Saul did a column bemoaning the fact that there is no reader's advisory in the library. And she called me for some reaction to this idea, and I agreed with her, and others did as well. And the truth is that the people of my generation who have become librarians are not the same kinds of readers that people were a generation or 2 generations ago. So if you're going to go to a librarian and ask, who comes after May Sarton, you're not going to get very much help anywhere.
That's true.
So librarians do have other ways, because we generally do not know anything ourselves directly but deal in secondary sources. We have other ways of finding out before the fact who the other May Sartons are. So the second question is, if we have other May Sartons in the collection and they're lost because nobody knows who they are and how wonderful they are, then we have an affirmative responsibility to bring those other May Sartons to everybody's attention, or at least to the attention of those people who are looking for other May Sartons. That is one of our biggest failings here. It is also one of the areas in which we hope to remedy our operation and change our operation based on the concept that when you give people what they want, you can also guide them to what they might like to want if they knew it existed. Mm-hmm. And it's generally the concept of merchandising or displaying or featuring particular areas of the collection, such as writers like May Sarton, such as even inspirational books, religious and otherwise, whatever one might want to feature. We need to, the way the library is organized, of course, with a spine-out shelving and everything in order, makes it very depressing for anybody who's looking for inspiration for reading, using it in the other sense, inspiration. So what we need to do, and will be doing over the course of the year, is reorganizing the way we display books so that we have the opportunity to do topical displays of other May Sartons or anything else. And particularly what we're looking for here is we're looking to feature areas of the collection that we think should have readership but don't, because people don't know how to find them or how to put combinations of books in different areas together and look for multiple reading experiences from those combinations.
Part of my question deals with the philosophy of a library, and I've always felt, partly because education is so important to me, I love to learn, that a library is an educational institution. And as such, part of its function in my life is to help me ask a better question. Necessarily not find the answer I'm looking for, but help me put the question I'm asking in the right words, or in deeper, more significant words than I now have to articulate it. And one of my frustrations with this particular library is I've been here 5 years, but I'm still a little lost to know where to find what I personally am in search of. And it's, I think, a function of a community library, which is no longer only a place for edification and learning, but also a place for multimedia events, the meetings, the general common denominator that this library meets so beautifully. I'm not being critical of that. It's just meeting a different need than I feel I have for my community library. If that, am I being clear? Do you understand what?
Well, what you and a lot of other people would like is reading guidance, I guess, or somebody who is knowledgeable enough about ideas and about books to be able to take your particular questions or interests and translate them into the names of books to read. And that, again, goes back to the idea of a reader's advisor. And that was the title of a library staff position for years and years in many libraries. Those of you who remember the New York Public Library, for example, will remember that in the 30s and 40s there was a desk right at the main entrance at the main library or within the main vestibule where the reader's advisor sat. And people came in and asked questions such as you're asking. I'm not saying that the librarian on duty knew all the answers off the top of her head, but there were the desk and the area was set up to answer questions like that. That is one of our major failings, and I don't really see, unless we can find the means to employ such a person, that we're ever going to be terribly expert at giving personal advice. I think the best that we can do is to look for blocks of interests that we either perceive or hope are there and try to put together specialized displays and lists to meet those interests.
Let's move beyond a little. It's a subcategory of the quality-quantity question, and that is, how does this library specifically choose what goes on the shelf or what comes off the shelf, what you choose to keep and discard in your collection? I told you this privately, that at the book sale I was sadly surprised to see 2 or 3 of what I consider to be marvelous religious books, religious in the broadest sense of that word, not in the parochial sense of that word, discarded from the collection. I'm sure because they didn't circulate. Nobody read them. But in my view, they should stay on the shelves because they're wonderful. But I'm one person in this community, and I wonder how the library as a whole makes those choices.
Well, perhaps I should go backwards on the question and start with the discards from the collection. I'm sure I have the same experience you do. Books that are discarded from this library that I find at the book sale, I would like to think that people were still reading. And perhaps, I certainly over the years have bought them myself and taken them home. And at least that way they're recycled. They may have had no use in 5 years, but if they appear at the book sale, at least one person will find that them, or let me stay with the singular, a person will find a book that has some meaning to that person. The person never borrowed the book, but the person will buy the book, and it will be recycled into somebody's collection.
But I never borrowed it because I already owned it.
Okay, fine. That's a different argument. But again, you are right. We're identifying this as a part of the question of quality versus quantity. Just because a book is unread, does that mean it's unworthy and should be discarded? Is a question which is very difficult for us to answer. We do have a finite amount of space on the shelves. We do have a very high use rate or turnover of collection. When the average book in the collection circulates 5 times a year, and you come upon a book which has not circulated in 3 years or 5 years, you know you have a very special case at hand. And then the question is to try to decide, is there quality in the book which merits its retention, updating, putting somewhere else in the collection, and in time to come in merchandising or featuring in some way to try to promote readership? Or has this book gone beyond its useful life in terms of content or sometimes in terms of condition? And those are supposed to be the judgments that librarians are educated to make based on their knowledge of the collection, their knowledge of its overall use in the subject areas in which they're working, and their knowledge of what else may have been published that is more likely to be read on the same subject. But we do try to reduce the collection each year by half as many items as we add. We are attempting to add somewhere around 10% to the size each year.
Which is
and
how
reduce
many
it.
books?
About 12,000 books a year is what we've been buying the last 2 or 3 years. And we do try to reduce it by 5,000 to 6,000 books a year. Many of those reductions are in duplicate copies of very popular books after demand has peaked. But we are also trying to maintain within each subject area a collection which continually turns over and is useful. And we do that on the same basis, I think, as a retail store reduces its inventory through clearance sales after its seasons have gone and the material or the inventories that have been purchased have not sold. And the reason is, the reason isn't financial so much as with a retail store, but there is still a common reason, and that is that it is very hard to get people to go through a lot of stuff to find what is good if they are continually fingering things that nobody else wanted either. So we feel that by keeping the collections on the shelves current, that is to say, keeping things on the shelves that continue to be used, that we are representing that everything there has some potential interest to users. In that particular judgment is where we reach the distinction or the problem that you're expressing. What about the book that is wonderful but that nobody knows about? The feeling is that if enough people go through it, pass the book and handle it enough times and don't pick it up or read it, that is a judgment of the marketplace. And unless we have very good reasons to feel otherwise, we have tended to let that judgment of the marketplace stand as the decision on whether or not to retain.
Which may not be the best standard, but that is the standard that seems appropriate now for East Brunswick. To be a devil's advocate, if I, as a concerned and loving user of this library, decided that I and a group of my friends wanted to improve your collection in a certain area, for example, the religion area, which is sorely lacking in good current books. And I came in not only with my proposed book list, but also with some money to pay for these books. How would you treat that?
Well, first I'd like to go back to the question of the Holocaust collection. When we decided to accept the gift or the offer of this collection, we weren't in a situation where we had no books on the subject before. We had been buying selectively the things that were being published, and this is a subject about which publication started as long as 20 years ago. And we had a fairly extensive collection. After the gift was offered, and while we were compiling the collection, we didn't stop buying either. We continued to buy that which we would have bought anyway, absent any extended sum of money. So we felt and would feel, in answer to your question, that a balanced selection program from tax funds is a prerequisite to considering an additional or augmented collection from other sources. So, having this collection and seeing that it was heavily used, we were able to make the judgment that a special collection with many more titles than we could justify purchasing from regular funds would be used and would be useful to a large number of people. We would have to ask the same question about the proposed collection of items or subject area that you and other people might want to bring into us. If we have, for example, a good representation of the texts and commentaries of a particular denomination on our shelves, and we see that they are essentially unused, And because they may be basic texts, we'll keep them even though they are unused, because there is we are not completely market-driven organization. We do try to have a core collection or a balanced collection of the seminal works on all the subject areas of human knowledge, including the religious texts and the major commentaries and biographies, etc. But if we found that a particular denomination was represented by a certain number of books, which was a fair sampling of what had been published in that area, and there was absolutely no readership, we could not accept a gift of 2 or 3 or 4 times as many books to put on the shelves, because our policy on selecting gifts is exactly the same as our policy on purchasing. We won't place into the collection that which we wouldn't buy anyway. We will not overbalance a collection through purchase, at least in particular subject areas. One might question the concept of multiple copies of fiction, but that's a separate issue. But we wouldn't overbalance due to the personal interests of librarians or staff. Only we would overbalance due to the personal interests of the actual users.
You may not believe this, but we're out of time. And I know there's much more for us to talk about. And maybe come fall we need to do a program on how to get us all stretched a little in what we read, we who live in East Brunswick. Because that's part of what we're really talking about here, how to bring us all a little higher quality than we're now finding.
Well, the cable is a marvelous opportunity to communicate with users of the library, and we have not, until tonight, done anything about the library's actual services.
Well, we'll have to remedy that.
So we would like to.
Thank you, David,
Thank you.
very much. This is Paula Durant from the United Church of Christ. Thank you for watching.